boardroom was silent, too silent. Billionaires, executives, and advisors sat frozen, watching an elderly woman try to speak, her trembling hands moving in a language no one there could understand. Their confusion filled the room, their impatience growing by the second. But just as whispers began to rise, the door creaked open. A boy no older than 10 walked in, his backpack still on, eyes steady and calm. He looked straight at her and began to sign. Gasps spread across the table. No one saw it coming, least of all the man who thought money could buy communication. It all began on a crisp Monday morning in one of New York's most exclusive boardrooms, a place where power dressed in gray suits and decisions worth millions were made over coffee and silence. At the head of the long oak table sat Margaret Langford, a woman whose name once shook Wall Street. But time had taken her voice literally. After losing her hearing in her 70s, she relied on sign language to communicate. Her son, Richard Langford, now a billionaire in his own right, had inherited her empire but not her patience. That morning she insisted on attending a high-stakes meeting herself. Investors, analysts, and journalists filled the room, their eyes darting between her and the interpreters who hadn't shown up. Minutes passed. The tension thickened. Margaret tried to sign her opening remarks, her fingers graceful yet desperate. No one understood. Some looked away. Others whispered. Richard, embarrassed, forced a tight smile, trying to steer the meeting forward. Outside that very building, a school tour was ending early. A group of children waited for their ride home. Among them was Eli Turner, a quiet 10-year-old who often felt unseen but never unheard. He had been raised by a mother who worked as a cleaner in that same office tower. And while most kids spent weekends playing games, Eli spent his learning sign language to communicate with his cousin, who was born deaf. That morning, fate had placed him just outside that boardroom door. Moments before everything changed. The muffled tension inside the room grew heavier with each second. Richard tried to speak over the discomfort, his polished voice echoing against the mahogany walls. But no one was really listening. Their attention kept drifting to his mother, Margaret, who was still signing slower now, confusion creeping into her usually sharp eyes. She didn't need to hear the whispers to know they were about her. A few assistants exchanged uneasy glances. One finally muttered, "Should we stop her?" Another shook his head. No one dared. Outside the glass door, young Eli stood quietly, watching through the narrow gap. He could read her hands, every movement, every flicker of emotion. She wasn't lost. She was trying to say something important, something urgent. But the world around her was deaf in a different way. Moments later, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Can someone do something?" Richard snapped, his embarrassment turning into anger. He was a man used to control, and right now he had none. The older woman paused mid-sentence, her hands dropping to her lap. The room fell silent again. And then, before anyone could stop him, Eli pushed open the heavy door. The creak startled everyone. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. The security guard near the back moved forward, but Margaret's eyes lit up. Recognition, relief. Almost like she had been waiting for him. Without hesitation, Eli stepped closer, setting his small backpack on the floor. He began signing, clear, precise, confident. Her face softened instantly, a faint smile appearing as she responded, her fingers dancing with renewed energy. Gasps filled the room. Some executives stood, trying to comprehend what was happening. Richard froze, his expression unreadable. He didn't know this boy. None of them did. Yet somehow he was bridging a silence none of them could cross. The child turned slightly toward the table and began translating. Every gesture, every pause carried meaning. He wasn't just interpreting, he was giving her voice back. And for the first time that morning, everyone listened. Margaret's message was simple, but it cut deep. She wasn't there to discuss profits. She was there to announce something more human, something her son had forgotten. A foundation for children with disabilities, funded not by ambition, but by empathy. And now, through this small boy's hands, her message reached every corner of that polished boardroom. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The crackle of the fireplace, the ticking of the wall clock, even the city hum beyond the windows, all faded beneath the rhythm of two pairs of hands moving in perfect harmony. Eli's fingers spelled out Margaret's message with precision and warmth, his young voice trembling slightly as he interpreted aloud for those who couldn't read signs. She says, "She built her empire not to make the rich richer, but to remind the world that silence doesn't mean weakness. The room fell still. Executives who moments earlier checked their watches now leaned forward, eyes fixed on the boy. Richard for once had nothing to say. His jaw tightened, his gaze bouncing between his mother and the child who had just stolen the attention of an empire. Margaret's hands moved again, faster this time, as if time itself might run out before she could finish. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Eli slowed, his voice cracking. She says, her biggest regret isn't losing her hearing. It's raising a generation that forgot how to listen. That line hit like thunder. A silence heavier than words followed. The billion-dollar meeting had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning. Richard's composure shattered. His breath caught, eyes wet, realizing how blind he had been. Not to sound, but to understanding. Across the table, a woman quietly reached for a tissue. Someone else whispered, "God." "She's right." Margaret smiled faintly at Eli, her wrinkled hands trembling as she signed one last sentence. He looked at her, nodded, and spoke. "She says, you helped her speak again. Thank you." Applause began softly, then grew, a sound that filled the room like music after years of silence. And in the middle of it, a 10-year-old boy stood beside a woman who had just found her voice again. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave. The usual chatter of business deals and deadlines had been replaced by something quieter, reflection. Margaret sat back, tears glistening against the light, her hand resting gently on Eli's shoulder. She didn't need words to thank him. Her expression said everything. Reporters who had come to cover a financial announcement now found themselves documenting something else entirely, a moment of humanity money couldn't buy. Cameras captured the image of a boy and an elderly woman united by a language most of the room had never understood until now. Outside, as the autumn breeze swept through the tall glass doors, Richard caught up with Eli before he left. For a long second, neither spoke. Finally, Richard knelt down to the boy's level and said softly, "You reminded me what my mother's voice really sounds like." His tone cracked, humble, human. Then quietly, he handed Eli a folded card. "Anytime you need something, you call." Margaret's foundation launched 2 months later, its first branch dedicated to free sign language education for children across the city. And on the opening day, Eli stood at her side, proudly translating her speech to a crowd that now understood her perfectly. The story spread quickly. It wasn't the wealth, the power, or the headlines that moved people. It was the simplicity of one truth. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest messages. And as the video of that meeting went viral, millions watched in silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. They didn't just see a billionaire's mother and a young boy. They saw a reflection of what's missing in the world today. Understanding. Because in a world obsessed with being heard, maybe the real power lies in learning to listen.